Problem. Right. So hello and welcome everyone to this special online in conversation. I hope everyone can hear me okay and excuse any firework noises that might be coming through. Sorry about that. My name is Greta Hewison and I'm the production coordinator of Film London Artists Moving Image Network, or FLAMIN for short. And we are the organisers of the Film London Jarman Award. So I'm just going to give a very short introduction about the award, as I'm very aware that you're all waiting to get to the quality portion of the evening, the in conversation. But I just wanted to give you some context about the award. And also, on behalf of FLAMIN, I'd really like to thank Towner Gallery, who've been great supporters of the award over the years and also great collaborators on this online version. And particularly, I'd like to thank Noelle Collins, Emma Haggerty, Will Barrett, and of course, Joe Hill, who's here tonight, who've worked on putting together this event with me. And Kate and Tim, representing Project Artworks this evening, thank you for being here and for sharing your work with us. So a little bit about the award. Founded in 2008 and inspired by the visionary British filmmaker Derek Jarman, the Film London Jarman Award recognises and supports artists working with the moving image in the UK, and it also comes with £10,000 worth of prize money. And the artists that are shortlisted for the award, in addition to Project Artworks, are Michelle Williams Gamaker, Quinlan and Rosie Hastings, Jenn Nkiru, Larissa Sansour, and Andrea Luka Zimmerman. And we at FLAMIN, and of course the jury of the Film London Jarman Award, really feel like the shortlisted artists illustrate the spirit of inventiveness within the medium and highlighting the breadth of creativity and craftsmanship that moving image has to offer, as well as its ability to really engage with audiences. And this tour will run until the 26th of November and exists in these special online collaborations with 7 venues across the UK, including this evening with Towner. And the winner of the Film London Jarman Award will be announced on the 24th of November in a special online presentation. And I really hope all of you will tune in for that, because it promises to be a very exciting presentation. Just a little bit about our partners. The award is presented in partnership with the Whitechapel Gallery, with support from Genesis Cinema. And of course, I have to thank our funders, Arts Council England, for their constant support in a time where nothing really feels very constant. If you've not had time yet to watch all of the works by the shortlisted artists on the Towner website, do not worry, because they will be available until midnight tonight. And you will also have another opportunity to watch them the weekend after next on the Whitechapel Gallery website. That's the 14th and 15th of November for the Film London Jarman Award Whitechapel weekend. And the weekend will be a chance to hear from all of the shortlisted artists. And it's going to be a double dayer of performances, in conversations, and also the presentation of new works. So do check that out as well. I'm really looking forward to it, of course, and that's really all I have to say. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and I'm very pleased to introduce Joe Hill, the director of Towner Gallery. Thank you.
Thanks, Greta. As Greta mentioned, Towner's been a long-standing partner of the Flaming Film London Jarman Award, and it's always a delight to sort of bring the shortlist to the gallery. And obviously, we're doing it slightly differently this year, by hosting it on the website as opposed to hosting it live in our cinema or in one of our exhibition spaces. But I think actually what I was going to say is I think what a remarkable shortlist of artists and quite incredible work, a huge range of work, and just really sort of importantly, I think for now, sort of tackling the very sort of overlooked sort of this issue of representation in many different forms and many different groups. So I think actually couldn't be more perfectly timed for the situation that we find ourselves in, not just in this year, but in this very day as we enter another lockdown and we look over the sort of sea to this incredible sort of deconstruction of democratic power that might be going on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And we will talk a little bit about that a little bit later, because I don't think we can really ignore it. What I would say is I'm delighted to be welcomed by Kate Adams, who is Artistic Director and CEO, and Tim Corrigan, Creative Director of Project Artworks. It's fair to say, Kate, we work quite closely together down here on the South Coast, being Hastings and Eastbourne being very close to each other. But actually, we never really get the space and time to properly sort of delve into what you do and the work that you do, which is quite remarkable. And I've known it ever since I was sort of working up at Camden Arts Centre in London many years ago. So it's been a delight to follow the progress of the organisation and sort of see where it's come from. Just before I forget, there is a question tab somewhere on your form. So if you do have a question for either of the panelists, just type it in there and it'll appear on my screen. And if it's appropriate, I'll try and weave it into the conversation. But if not, we'll try and take some questions towards the end of the time. So we're going to talk for about 40 minutes, I think, and then we can take a bit of time to do some questions and things. But firstly, I just wanted to welcome Kate and Tim and just sort of start with Project Artworks, if that's okay. And I think we can get into the film in a little bit, but I think it's such a sort of remarkable setup, and it's been around since 1997. I wondered, Kate and Tim, if you could talk a little bit about what the setup is at Project Artworks, where it's come from, and sort of a little bit about its history for those that don't know.
Yes, well, thank you. Thanks very much for that intro, Joe. It's great to have this conversation with you. I'm really glad that we're able to do that. Shall I say something and then you can say that? Or do you want to go first?
Well, you can go.
Okay. Well, for example, today, first of all, we, as Joe said, we've been around for about 20 years, but like today, we have a site in Hastings, which has these 3 studios in an arch, old sort of a road arch. It's all brick, and this is the upper room. And we run a sort of studio program so that people come and they come and make work, and there's a sort of spirit of collaboration. We work with neuro minorities and create, I suppose, just a sense of possibility in the studio spaces where anything can happen, and very often the most extraordinary things happen in the process of making. And in fact, that's very much where film comes in and came in early on to our practice, because we had to capture some of this stuff, which sometimes is so extraordinary, and it's like a record of a moment of experience, and it's a trace. And so the studios don't necessarily produce a lot of artifacts, although they do. We have an incredible archive of work now that's been accumulated over 20 years. We've got about 3,500 physical works, and an increasingly digitized access to that. So quite a strong database now, a collection of work by neurodiverse artists and makers. But the other aspect of the work is that we work holistically with people who may need support in all areas of their life. And so we work with support teams and families and caregivers. And you know, increasingly, especially at the moment, I would say 40 to 50% of our work is also advocacy and putting a sort of circle of support around individuals to ensure that if they need advice, knowledge, training, help with negotiation, you know, attendance at social care reviews, or even recently best interest meetings, that we can be part of that aspect of their life, because we can't work with people in isolation and then ignore that side of how they have to live.
Yeah, I further to what Kate was saying, our work is all about relationships with people, and the studio here really is the sort of bedrock of our practice. It's where we develop these long-term trust-based relationships with individuals, some of whom have been coming here for 10, 15 years and working with us. And also relationships with their families, with the social care sector, with the cultural sector. And so we make work and people that we work with such a diverse group of people here, people that identify as artists and have a very autonomous practice. And people who don't identify as artists and for whom the work is really about this collaboration with facilitating artists who work here with us. And about this idea that we create a space for a dialogue with them through materials, through environment. So the work sort of manifests itself in lots of different ways. And we respond to that, and we have exhibitions and traditional kind of artistic outputs that we kind of, and we incorporate all those different ways of making work and being with people actually into the shows that we have. We don't sort of separate out kind of a traditional artistic output like a film or a painting on a wall from working with someone with the social care sector or the peer support or the advocacy. It's all kind of part of the same piece of work really, because in order to work with an individual, we have to embrace all aspects of their life.
I think in that way, it's been that really poignant in this sort of, as I've sort of been looking through certainly the film and some of the bits around it as well, is thinking about this idea of always learning and everybody's learning, the sort of breakdown of the hierarchy of learning. And I think the setup is particularly interesting because I think it's called a collective, and it sort of starts to break down the hierarchy of what that studio practice or that sort of learning and the sort of traditional learning within an education or an art setting might actually look like. And I think that comes right through into all of the work that you guys start to do, and talking about that, we'll talk about that a little bit with the film itself, and actually how you went about producing the film and what the process was for doing that. But thinking about that sort of advocacy side of what you do, and almost activism really in a way, is something that me and Kate were talking about the other day. What does the Jarman Award and being shortlisted for it mean for Project Artworks then? What does that, how does that sort of sit with what you're doing?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the thing about it, which is so exciting, is that it's a place for alternative voices, I think, the Jarman Award. Looking back through its history, it has really held quite pioneering voices in its shortlists. And I think it has an edge of activism. It zeroes in on film and filmmakers and practice that is exploring new ways, I think, new ways of representing things and new audiences also. So for us, that's very exciting. It's also bridges this sort of divide between what is mainstream and what isn't, which I think is a really interesting proposition for us. And it's something that we've been working, towards, and have, we've breached the boundaries of that at different times, but there's still a way to go before there's a sort of full acceptance of a sort of expanded conception of art that goes beyond artifacts and traditional productions and actually veers into a way of living and care for each other as artists, as communities, and as co-livers in our communities. And I think the Jarman is doing something very interesting with that Jarman Award.
I think it's also been something that you guys have been doing for quite some time, and I think a lot of institutions like ourselves are really, you know, have been doing bits of it, but starting to think about that as a role. What is the role of institutions like ourselves, you know, within the community that we serve, and how can we to be that central place? You know, I think that somebody said to me, you know, going beyond the idea of getting obsessed with buildings and sort of assets and things like that, and getting more into this idea of people, and how these cultural institutions can become a support for that wider parts of people's lives, not just one sort of element of it.
I mean, why not? I mean, what else is there? I mean, and actually co-production is, you could transfer that into the idea of filmmaking and art making, but co-production can also be a way of working with services and the state. We do a lot of education or sort of sharing of ideas about what the state is for people who might rely on it more than others, because it is this sort of monolith of complexity. But it's also a facilitator if you know how to access things and if you have support to do that.
Yeah.
And I think actually the role of culture is changing.
Yeah, I mean, we're an organisation. We obviously started very small, and we're sort of bigger now. But we as an organisation, we have a practice as an artistic practice, and you can really sort of trace back through our history how that's evolved as a sort of singular artistic practice, if you like. And we've always sort of worked in response, actually, to the sort of shifting landscape around the people that we work with. And I guess being nominated for the Jarman Award is really nice, because we've been doing this for like 20 years, and it feels like there's a recognition of that now, and the whole idea of socially engaged practice and what that means is much more commonplace now. So yeah, for us to be nominated for the Jarman has been really nice, because actually it's probably the first time that it has been recognised in that way. Did you say that's right? Okay.
Well, I think that we've had exhibitions, but it's the sort of it's being part of this selection, which is really nice, and it's fantastic for the crew in the films and what it means for them and their families. We're just putting together some stuff for the presentation weekend, and Tim's been doing some interviews with people, and it's just so touching, actually.
With families, and you know, for some people, they are completely ambivalent to the idea that they're in a film or being recognised by an award, or it's just a neurotypical kind of construct that. But for others, it's really important, and actually for the families around individuals, it's really important. So that's been really moving, actually, to hear some of the testimonies from them when we've been asking them about what it meant to be in the film, or what it meant for their young person or adult child to be in the film. And so the understanding, actually, of what that meant for the individuals is varied, but for the families, it's definitely it's a gift, actually. It felt like that.
I think just talking about that idea of a sort of collective practice sort of brings us nicely onto the film itself, I think, because it it's very clear the sort of authorship is open within it. I mean, there are names around it and the participants within it and things, but there's this sort of openness around the authorship, which is what you're mentioning, Tim, in relation to that sort of wider practice. So the film that's been shortlisted is called Illuminating the Wilderness. It's actually part of a bigger project called Explorers. And for those of you that haven't seen the film sort of charts a journey through this quite incredible landscape up in the Highlands of Scotland, with a whole crew of artists, really, and support families and things that are experiencing this landscape together. And there's that, I said to Kate the other day, it's really nice that you sort of feel part of the journey, and some of how the mixing of footage and has been used in the edit sort of brings you along as the viewer into it, and there's no sort of funny introduction or sort of narrative running through it that sort of tells you what's happening. You are just part of this exploration, which is quite incredible. But I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the process and the planning for that particular trip, and the making of the film, you know, and where it might go from here as well.
Well, it was a long, a long road.
Just talking about the individuals that we went with, they were all people that obviously we've known for a very long time, that we've had these like relationships with for a long time, and their families. But obviously there was a lot of risk as well involved around managing a project like that, keeping people safe. And so a lot of the pre-production work was around kind of risk assessments and logistics. I think that a film shoot has in sort of neurotypical film production has a very kind of specific hierarchy. It's very clear. In fact, like one of the clearest kind of hierarchies you can have. And so this, though, was the way that we make that work is very different, obviously, because everyone's filming, everyone's supporting each other. The boundaries between who's leading and directing are constantly kind of shifting, because you're responding to in the moment what's happening. So that was what was really interesting actually about making a film like that, is that we were able to
just share the experience. And it was much more traumatic for us than it was for the protagonists in multiple ways, because we had this whole kind of system behind being there. But it was an incredible thing to be able to do that. And it's partly because the Arts Council, believed in it as a proposition, and all of these people came to it. Martin Swan, who was an amazing coordinator, all of the sort of structure behind it within the Project Artworks team. We have quite a big team now. We're quite a big organisation in some ways. And so logistically, it was very complex. But once we were all there, and everybody came in different ways, like Sam and George came up on a train, and we made sure that they had a 4x4 at the station so they could drive from there to the site. And then three of us, Tim and I drove, we got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and drove to Inverness Airport and flew back to Gatwick and picked up 3 people and their support teams and flew back, and drove them out to the site. And then Mandy and Gabriella drove up over 3 days, didn't we? Yeah. Because actually there were, not everybody could travel in the same way. So there were just getting there was actually quite complex. But then actually when we were there, the whole thing just began to flow. A whole bunch of them refused to stay in the bothy, which was probably good, because there were 11 of us who stayed overnight in the bothy. And the thing is, there are risks, like the weather could have been, impossible, and Paul actually is epileptic, so he could have had a seizure. But you take these calculated risks because you don't want to necessarily frame people within the limits of risk and risks that are associated with different ways of being.
Quite for some of the people that we went with, people would say they have behaviour sort of described as challenging. So quite often for people that live their life like that, they live in a risk-averse kind of world where it's let's not do that just in case this happens. But by doing that, you sort of deny someone the chance to try something that's difficult, overcome that, and have that feeling of having done something. So it's about taking those kind of risks, really carefully managed risks on people's behalf, to allow them to have really full experiences, that we all find things difficult. There are always challenges, and sort of part of kind of, you know, what drives us is overcoming those challenges and how that feels once you've done that. And so if you live in a world that's always denied to you, it doesn't feel free. And so I guess, and actually Mandy, who's the mum of Gabriella, talked about Gabby being free in the interview that we did with her recently, and it's really important that. So I think that as an organisation we do that all the time. So what happened really in Scotland was a sort of microcosm of what happens here all the time. In a way, we just sort of
much further away,
and
from any signals as well, which was also a bit scary. But I mean, you know, the landscape is really important.
Yeah.
The landscape had to have this presence. It had to be both out there and in here as part of the experience. And so we did quite a lot of recce's. You know, we talked, Joe, didn't we, about I did some reconnaissance to different forest sites, and I had this idea of going into a deep centre of a forest and staying and sort of bivouacking. But actually, when I began to really look at forest sites, there was nowhere far away enough. And so when I read about Glen, because there's this fantastic organisation called Trees for Life that are rewilding that site, and the whole idea of rewilding appealed. But then also they have a bothy down there, and they connected us to this climbing group that also has a bothy right next to theirs, or up the hill a bit, that is in the middle of nowhere. And so there was this lovely sense of connection there, and they were actually, you know, around if we had got into trouble.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite amazing, isn't it? Because it's so sensory, the film, and it does exactly what you're saying with the out there and in here, because it goes from the macro to the micro really beautifully. You're sort of looking at minute detail of the sort of forest floor, and then you're seeing these sort of great landscapes, and just the sort of the pace of the sort of moving through the landscapes with the artists that you were working with, sort of having that sort of that slowness and gentleness of sort of having how you move through the landscape and how you navigate that, but done in a way that really still embraces some of the visual spectacle, I think, of some of that space. Is quite incredible, really.
Well, thanks. So it's so nice to hear, actually. We haven't had many conversations about the actual experience of seeing the film, and it's really good to hear that. I mean, you got very wet, didn't you?
I think what was, I did get wet. What was really interesting, actually, was that, you know, when anyone goes away, there's that opportunity to slightly redefine yourself, because you're removed from everything that's familiar, and a landscape like that even more so, because it's so kind of, you know, you're not bombarded by the technology and everything that we have around us all the time. We're very sort of free in that landscape, and having that opportunity to be there with the people that we went with was an absolute privilege in that sense, because it just it allowed us all to sort of unfurl a little bit, and it just sort of it truly felt a little bit like living in the future. I know that sounds weird, because we were sort of, it was really remote, but it was like this idea of this kind of neurodiverse community, which we were, where there was no obvious leader, there was no obvious barrier. There was, people were free and totally accepted on their own terms, of course, because we know them really well, and that's how we can operate. And so it went for all of us. So that was what was really quite incredible about the experience of just being there, regardless of making the film. On top of that, hopefully the film kind of, you know, the idea for the filming, I mean, we had ideas for days, but we didn't really plan specific kind of shoots or shots. There was a few constructed scenes, but very few within the actual filmmaking process. It was all kind of left to kind of being led and determined by the people that we were with. And so that
and
was...
they all spread out, which was at times alarming. So the cameras sometimes become a bit like prosthetic searchers for people. And I mean, Sam and George just go off into the distance, and Martin's going, where's they gone? But you know, the process of just keeping track of people and
managing the freedom there as well. Like actually, you talk about freedom, and they've got the freedom, and then you've got to manage that in some ways.
Yeah, totally. But also, it's one of the things about the Glen, Afric. I mean, it's a secret. It's an incredible secret place in many ways, because it's very. You have to travel a long way to get into the heart of it. But halfway along is this incredible dam as well, where there is the bridge and this sort of sense of precipice on one side with that's dark and has this massive water.
Yeah, felt like the gates of Mordor or something, didn't it?
Yeah.
It was like this.
And then on the other side, this incredibly still loch. So it's a very, very special landscape. And I think, you know, that's one of the reasons we chose it, both that it had access in some ways into the heart of the landscape, but it also had these very extreme sort of variations.
I think one of the, you know, we were there for a relatively short time actually, and actually like with the luxury of, you know, being there for 6 months or something and living like that, it would have, you know, we tried to make that happen within that short space of time, and actually it was really amazing how that did happen. But to truly kind of allow that all in, you know, and to really settle with that place and with people would have been really interesting.
We're building up to another
maybe
trip,
we'd go
basically.
again and go a bit longer. But
I suppose there's also this thing about when going to that hierarchy conversation again, and one of some of my favourite bits are when you come inside the borries or the buildings. Are they borries? Yeah, the sort of structures they're called.
They're lodges. Yeah.
we had these chalet lodges that we sort of stayed in as that was our base, and then we had the bothy, which was this stone building.
Yeah, bothy, that's it. And they just processes like folding the sheets that the sort of feature in the film. But then I also really like when some of the characters and the people involved in the crew start to be introduced through conversation. So there's this sort of connecting up of who's there and who's involved and what's going on. And again, it draws you straight into that space again. And you know, I could have watched it for hours. It was really meditative and you know, sort of not having been there, but I felt I had sort of gone there in some ways.
Yeah, it's quite sensory. I mean, I think that Ben Rivers and Margaret Salmon, who were kind of parachuted in to this situation and had to adapt quickly and then spend a night in a bothy in a remote place filming with people they didn't know. It was really quite a challenge, but they really, you know, they're just very skilled, you know, artists and filmmakers, and they were able to sort of pick that up really quite smooth, seamlessly.
Yeah, it's about people, isn't it?
Yeah.
Margaret kept the wood stove going overnight. There's no running water at the bothy.
Oh. And when we spoke, you talked about these films being a sort of authentic record of experience. And do you think this one gets close to what your sort of aims around that? Sort of do you think that you've achieved that in this film and sort of getting that authentic record of experience?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think we get close, because I think, but you're limited really by time and kind of what actually happens, and so, you know, I think that actually, you know, allowing, because actually you're seeing a snapshot of people, you know, you're seeing this sort of snapshot, and some people who are verbal will, you know, or some people might be more talkative or verbal, so you might get more information, I'd say, about them, and then other people might appear to be more enigmatic. And I think over time you would draw out more, could be drawn out. But I think in terms of in terms of reflection of the experience and how it was for people on that trip, it felt really close. And I guess the whole idea of this sort of allowing yourself to be open to the sort of sensory nature of the place you're in, and knowing that some of the people that we work with and who are with us there are very receptive to sensory kind of input, trying to allow the film to reflect that for them as their kind of contribution. I think there were ways in which we made the film that kind of work in that way.
Yeah, we did, but we also were really mindful that, to tell a story and to tell the truth are not always the same thing, but that when there's a sort of public audience that you aren't necessarily there to mediate, the work has to do that between othering someone and actually allowing an audience of the work to intimately engage and connect, and to reduce and eradicate preconceptions and begin to experience something of that other way of being in the world, which we have so much to learn from. And I think that is always the balance of what you choose to leave out and what you choose to keep in. It's an ethical proposition, really.
And when we're editing something like that, I mean, it's always kind of how, it's not so much, it's really kind of thinking all the time about how you're representing people who aren't necessarily who aren't necessarily really aware of what that means, what it means to be in a film, what the implications are. So all the time, and that goes right across the work that we do here. And it's not something new, but I guess the more profile that something gets, the more not the more you consider that, but just that becomes it's obviously really important.
Well, it's a huge challenge in all of the sort of conversation about representation, isn't it? Actually making those steps of just visibility first, and then sort of starting to think about how represent. It's a really interesting. I know you've talked about it as this sort of ethical tightrope in the past, Kate. It's a really sort of tricky, and just you sort of hope that the work will continue to sort of open out in a way that doesn't mean it's such a tightrope going forward. We've got a question actually from somebody. It's a very practical question. It says, what was the timescale between initial proposal idea and the whole crew actually being on site exploring and filming?
Well,
from the concept of the project, or from how long was the shoot?
I think it was from the concept, yeah. So what was the timescale between initial proposal idea and
the idea of forests first sort of began to filter in about 3 years before we realised it, a bit longer even. And then there was a process of fundraising for it, because obviously because the production of Illuminating the Wilderness was part of this much bigger project, that we used the metaphor of wilderness to also describe something about how what people experience on the high street, if it's a very complex place for someone autistic, for example, but also how culture and cultural institutions may see this world of disability as well. And so it was a process of constructing quite a complex web of partnerships and collaborations, because we went to Sydney with the film as well twice as part of this project. So I suppose it took 3 years to get there, and the intense work around the logistics was a year.
Yeah, a year. I mean, yeah.
We had a very tight deadline for the turnaround of the edit, which was only about 3 months, which was really quite difficult, I think.
That's very tight, isn't it?
So yeah, it was a long
But
process.
like, yeah, I mean, like we sort of said earlier about this piece of work, this idea, this filmic strand has come out of multiple films that have sort of come before. So in terms of the sort of thinking around it, it's been sort of happening throughout the sort of all our work. But yeah, like Kate said, we got a grant, and I think about a year and a half later we were in Scotland. So.
And Kate's promised me that the next one she'll take some directors and curators of galleries and institutions. Yeah.
Of course, we'll go on a complete field trip. I mean, you know, where should we go next? There's a definite interest in another expedition because, I mean, you know, we learnt a lot from that.
Yeah.
And we would like to do it again.
What about the desert? You know, sort of getting that scale thing, thinking
the
about
light. Yeah, the light. I mean, I'm particularly, one of the things that was fantastic about the Glen is this series of locks that it has as you go deeper in. And when we went to do a recce in February, we walked to the bothy and back, and we met up with the Trees for Life people who are running a kind of trip there with veterans from the Iraq War. And it was a very powerful experience, but what was incredible that day is there was snow all over the hills and the landscape, and then the locks, as we were going through, were just totally still like glass. So the whole landscape was reflected, and that really made me think about fjords and, you know, maybe mountains and still water.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a filmic landscape.
I mean, somewhere in the Caribbean.
And the project's obviously been a number of galleries around the UK, MK Gallery being one, and I think Tate Liverpool, it was showed there as well. What I'm interested in, and when we've talked about working together with Project Artworks and Towner in the past, it's been this really nice conversation about exchange, this learning that the institution will do as well. What could you say a little bit about those two institutions and other ones that are involved as well, and what's that learning process been for them, and how it's a very important part of what you do, isn't it, in terms of continuing to advocate for neurodiverse artists and their representation within galleries like MK and Tate Liverpool and Towner and places like that?
That's a great question, Joe. I mean, I think what happens is the structure, what Explorers came out of actually quite a long process of understanding what collaboration with galleries and institutions and bringing them together with encounters with people with complex needs and neurominorities, what that entails. And so there is a process that you need to go through. And the first thing really to do is to map the social care sector around specific venues, because then you can see somehow, it reveals something about who is in your community, and also how to connect with them, because looked after people have both a sort of facilitating framework around them, but it's also a barrier to direct communication. So we map the social care sector around an organisation, and then we begin to create connections. And our main aim is to establish, to enable and facilitate and nurture a relationship between the institution and those communities, so that it lives beyond our involvement. And so we set up, we do that mapping, and then we set up direct encounters so that everyone within an organisation, and you know, MK Gallery were fantastic at that. you know, gets into a big space with a group of people that they've never met before and who may not use learnt modes of communication or social interaction. And then they just try to connect using art materials and a very open, facilitated workshop, creative, you know, workshop. And then that gives a sort of kinetic, experiential knowledge that you can't get in any other way. And so that also, and it also reveals the organisation to itself, because you can see the quality of people and the way that, you know, people can, you know, transcend fears or a nervousness about not doing things right, and they just connect. And that's a really powerful learning thing for a group of people. And we've learnt how to look after organisations better. I mean, when we first started working, I think it was, we expected some kind of, you know, we didn't support people enough, actually. And over the years, we've learned to support the neurotypical and participants, you know, much more, because in some ways they're much more vulnerable.
I mean, that learning experience for an organisation is just is invaluable, I would imagine.
Yeah, and they embrace it. I mean, they've all embraced it.
We had 7 partners on Explorers, cultural partners, different organisations that we work with. But like, as Kate said, that this collaboration with cultural institutions are kind of
I'm just plugging in.
We've been doing for a long time. Yeah, we're on low battery. We've been doing for a long time, and I guess it was because we wanted the communities and groups that we worked with to see themselves reflected in the programming or audiences of cultural organisations. We saw cultural organisations as great places for, often publicly funded places for people to be.
And they are actually very open.
And they are, yeah. So,
sorry,
just to sort of talk about the collaborative work that we do, and how that kind of building that kind of bridge between the social care sector, which is often this sort of deeply kind of unglamorous world of the social care sector, and this sort of glamorous world of mainstream kind of culture, and kind of working in that kind of place between there. I've always, there's a kind of anarchy in that, which I've always thought is really exciting, and it's a really interesting place to be. And kind of, as Kay said, working with organisations, you know, about kind of just sort of dispelling kind of fear, or kind of just, you know, just not having the opportunity to be in contact with different groups of people. Being able to sort of facilitate that is really exciting. And when we work with organisations, we work with people from, you know, from the director down to the front of house staff, and everyone is sort of levelled in that space, because someone with, you know, someone with complex needs wouldn't necessarily treat anyone differently based on their kind of job status. So that's really interesting as well. So I think, yeah, that kind of, that work is really important, and actually you know, the bedrock of our practice is here. We learn so much, we're taught so much by the people we work with, you know, the relationships that we have with people. This isn't about doing good work. It's not about kind of, we're doing this for someone. This is a mutually kind of beneficial relationships that we have, which then hopefully we can kind of, you know, just open that window for other people, other organisations, create opportunities for people.
I think that word relationship is really critical, isn't it? Because it goes on lots of different ways between the institution and the team and the people that are coming in. Oh, you may have frozen there. Oh, you're back. We've got a rather long sort of statement question just come up in the chat, actually. from Michelle, saying, in my opinion, as an artist filmmaker, I believe that there is a great lack of representation of people with disabilities in contemporary film. Your practice is unique in that it contributes to the cultural history and representation of disability in ways in which disability is not explained, excused, or exploited. Do you feel that as artists working in the field, you are also operating in the wilderness?
Yeah, sometimes. Hello, Kyle. Lovely to see you and hear you.
Yeah, I thought it might be.
I think less so. Actually.
I think, well, just now, I think there is a real heightening of the sense of resistance and activism in work, because, you know, to care is almost like a political statement in itself. You know, it's become an act of resistance in itself, and is critically important just now. So yeah, there is a sense of wilderness, but strangely less so. I mean, I think what's happening is, especially with the pandemic and lockdown and the extraordinary times that we're living in right now, that there is this sense that all of the systems and constructs that are so constraining have been slightly thrown up in the air, and there is a possibility of a new way. So to be engaged in this work now feels very vital. That's not to say there isn't a lot to do, but actually, you know, it's being picked up, and organisations to, you know, round that question, that they are taking it on, and there is a sort of legacy of the work, both at Take Liverpool and MK Gallery are doing, Delaware. There's a lot of good stuff going on. I mean, Mikhail's show was part of the Explorers output last year at Delaware, and it was a beautiful work.
It really was. I mean, just coming right back to that beginning point then about lockdown, going into a sort of second lockdown, could you talk a bit about what that might mean for the artists within your collective? I mean, I noticed on the website you've got some really great sort of resources that people can access, which again go into that finances and wider sort of social and lifestyle life support for those people. But I mean, it just is worth reiterating the sort of challenges that come about from a situation and restrictions like this, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think what was very scary the first time around was the way in which the sort of the fragility of the progress that had been made, so, you know, in society around value of people and acceptance was shown to be actually wafer thin. And for example, NICE issued the clinical frailty scale within a few days of lockdown, and the instruction to clinicians on how to weigh up ethical decisions in who to treat and who not to treat. And everyone, their first directive was that everyone under the age of 65 with the label learning disability, autism, or cerebral palsy was to be treated as having a comorbidity, and therefore an innate frailty, which is just not the case. I mean, they did rescind that and slightly adjust it, but it still exists. And I was in a hospital setting a few weeks ago, and the clinical frailty scales are all over the walls. You know, it is above clinicians' workstations. So that value system, the sort of rights that people have fought for to live an equal life and to be valued and to be seen as contributors and to, you know, just to live without fear of discrimination is actually still ever present. That possibility that of eugenics and a whole other ugly side of human values exists still. So we need to be, we mustn't be complacent, but there is at the same time progress.
And I suppose that goes even further, really, when we start to think about the erosion of sort of human rights and around the Brexit, so as we leave Europe, and there's a sort of move to change some of those laws. And I think keeping an eye on how that progresses is going to be really critical, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, at the moment, the Human Rights Act has, it has a lot of leverage in fighting for equality of life and a right to be involved. And I just think that it is a fear amongst us that that could be eroded. And certainly austerity has created a climate where you really need to be vigilant about how you live. If you are dependent on support to live every day, then there's a certain dependency that you need to recognise, but it doesn't mean to say that you're not necessarily a contributor to the project of our society. I mean, many of the people we work with, including my son, they're employers of multiple people.
Yeah.
The tax on that employment, and they're not black holes of public funding; they're generators, and they also keep us entirely connected to the fundamental, beauty of human qualities, like honesty, and they're without guile or malice.
I think I think that's a really, really important point, is what we can actually take from the work that you do. And I think that term that you said about care as a form of resistance is something that actually will hopefully be something that will embed more into certainly into institutions like mine that operate and things. But we're coming up to an hour now, so we probably should wrap it up. There are obviously, Michael's given a few more questions as well, which is about sort of interesting references for younger artists, and I think that's a really important thing to pick up, but probably something that maybe you could do at the Whitechapel talk or something. So for those of you that haven't seen Project Artworks films or any of the other shortlisted films, you can still see them until midnight on the Towner website, and then they'll be on the Whitechapel website on the 14th and 15th of November. And Kate and Tim will be talking a bit more, I think at 3:30 on the Saturday the 14th on the Whitechapel website as well. So I think that'd be really, really good to tune in. But I just want to say thank you so much, Kate and Tim, for taking time to talk to us and to explore a little bit more about Project Artworks and the film and things. It's been really great. And
thank you very much for your consideration and sensitivity of your questions. Have been really helpful.
No, it's been a pleasure. So, and thank you everyone for joining and watching us and things, rather than watching the fireworks and things. But we have recorded this, so hopefully we'll be able to put something up on maybe on Project Artworks and Towner website as well, so that we can people can watch it, if those who haven't seen it. But thank you all, and have a lovely evening. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Tim.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.